Today I'm introducing the Couch, a 1947 Chrysler Windsor. I haven't done any custom work to this car, but it's a very cool car, and it's got some unique features, so I thought I'd show it to you anyways. Like a lot of the vehicles in the fleet, this is another score that I got from Uncle Nick. He had it from a guy down in Minnesota, and he brought it up here. I saw him drive it around a few times, and I would be cruising down the road in a different vehicle, and I'd see it. Usually I'd drive up behind him, and I always thought the lines on it were really cool. I didn't find out until later that the reason why he was going so slow is because that the brakes didn't work that well. But by the time that I got it from him, it needed some ignition work. It still needed some brake work, but I couldn't turn it down. It was a cool car, and I thought it would be a fun one to drive around. He's the one that gave it the name The Couch, and he said it's because sitting in the driver's seat, it feels like you're sitting in a couch driving down the road. But he also said that the back seat is like a couch itself. So the name stuck. I kept it The Couch. After I did some ignition work to get it fired up, I got it back to the shop and had to use the emergency brake the whole way because there were no brakes in it. And I started diving into the brakes. I tried honing the master cylinder out, and I actually had a friend help me hone the master cylinder out. And even though I tried to impress upon them the importance of moving the honing device in and out of the master cylinder as they were doing it, they ended up sitting in one spot and honed out only half of the master cylinder. I wasn't paying attention close enough. I was the one that did the wheel cylinders, and I did that correctly. But the master cylinder needed to be replaced before the brakes worked. And all the shoes, all the linings on the shoes were worn down. And so I needed to get some new shoes on there, and I couldn't find any replacements at the time. And so what I did was get some brake lining material from a supply store, and I actually cut and riveted the material onto the brake shoes. And that worked, but the material was too soft. And so a lot of times the brakes would stick, and the pedal feel was soft. I managed to track down some new old stock brake shoes, which was a good score. And so now the brakes are good, but it took a while to get there. I've always loved the dashboard in this car. There's so much chrome. The styling is really cool. It's got a Bakelite glove box door. Clock is good at making a ticking noise, but that's about the best it can do. Even though I need some new glass, the view over this hood has always been one of my favorite views. There's something about the shape of the hood and the hood ornament. When you're going down the road, it just feels really good. The engine in this car is a 251 straight six. It's a Chrysler engine. It was the long block of the Chrysler engines. It was similar to the straight six that's in the 41 in the old Dodge, but it's the block is quite a bit longer. I didn't have to do much other than the ignition. I rebuilt the carburetor, and there had always been a pretty bad crack in the exhaust manifold. And so I was down south in the state at one of a junkyard that had only old cars. And I talked to the guy and said, you know, do you have any of those Chrysler 251s? I'm looking for an exhaust manifold. And he said, yeah, there should be a few Chryslers out there. Go ahead and go see what you can find. And so he told me where in the lot the Chryslers were. So I went down there and sure enough, found two Chryslers next to each other. And the intake and exhaust manifold looked like they were in great shape. So I pulled those off of there. And I brought them back up to the office, and I said, all right, I found what I needed. And as I put them up on the counter, I turned the intake over, and I noticed that it was cracked all down the bottom. It had filled up with snow and water, and then it had cracked after that water turned to ice. And so I said to the guy, oh no, you know, what am I gonna do? I didn't notice that until I got up here. And he said, well, there was another one right next to it. Why don't you go and take the other one off, and I'll give you both of them for the price of one. And so I couldn't turn that down. I went over and got the other one out of there, the other intake and exhaust manifold. And that one was in good shape. The intake was in good shape, but the exhaust was in rough shape. And so I brought it up to the office anyways. I got the 2-for-1 deal. And I brought them home and I set them on the bench, and I tried to combine the two of them. And a lot of times, because of these bolts that join the intake and the exhaust manifold together are pretty important, what they would do is bolt the two together, and then they would machine the surface where it meets the block. And so with that mismatched pair of exhaust and intake manifold, the intake sat much farther back than the exhaust manifold. They were not because they weren't a matching set, they weren't going to work. So I practiced my cast iron welding skills, and I've got some TIG rod that I can weld cast iron with. And I TIG welded up the crack, and then for good measure, just to make sure that it was going to be okay, I mixed up some JB Weld, and I kind of used JB Weld as surface filler, and sure enough, it worked out. There's no vacuum leak out of that intake. So I felt pretty lucky about that. Another cool thing about these engines is when Chrysler went into World War II production, even though this is a 47, the design really didn't change since 41. And so when Chrysler went into production for World War II, they ended up using 5 of these blocks bolted together to make a single engine, a 30-cylinder engine. And that's what they put in a lot of the Sherman tanks. And most of those Sherman tanks went over to Great Britain and were British tanks. Most of the Sherman tanks that the Americans used had Cadillac or Ford engines in them. But if you look up information about a Chrysler multi-bank, there were 5 of these 6-cylinder engines bolted together. And it's funny because when I start this engine up, it sounds like a tank to me. So I think it has some of that pedigree. The transmission in this car is really interesting too. It's I consider it a semi-automatic, but it's fluid drive is the technical name for it. And it's got a clutch, it's got a high, low, and a reverse. And both the high and the low have 2 gears in them that are switched in between with a solenoid. So it's basically a 4-speed. I don't often start in low, but you can start in low. You get to a certain speed and you let off the gas and the solenoid clicks it into the next gear. And you can also start in high and you put it in high gear, and you get up to 25 miles an hour and you let off the gas and the solenoid clicks it into the highest gear. And once it's in gear, you don't ever need to touch the clutch pedal again. So it's an interesting setup. It's not very common. And even though it's technically a manual transmission, they had some sort of a torque converter in between the engine and the transmission. So it was pretty cutting edge at the time. Another funny story about this dashboard, when I was driving it around at night a few different times, it seemed like the dashboard kind of changed colors after a certain amount of revs. I never really could figure it out, but I thought maybe the generator was kicking out too many amps and it was changing the color of the light bulbs. And I was parked at the post office one day, and an older gentleman came outside and he said, let me ask you this. From 0 to 25, is it green? And from 25 to 55, is it yellow? And from 55 on, is it red? And I said, well, what do you mean exactly? And he said, well, my parents used to have one of these, and we'd sit in the back seat and we were just enamored by the different colors. And sure enough, it turns out that is a feature that they put in there so that you didn't really have to focus too much on the speedometer. You could just have, out of the corner of your eye, have the colors so that the speedometer was glowing and know kind of the range of speeds that you were in. And I thought that was a pretty cool feature that Chrysler worked out. It's got 2 heaters in here, which kick out the heat. It's pretty cool. Comfort Master. And the rear doors are suicide doors, so they open opposite what they would as a normal door. Interior is pretty rough, but the rear door panels are original, and the headliner is original. And the sun visors. Seen better days, but it's still interesting to see. can see it's been painted. Does not have the factory paint color on it anymore. And you can see that even the repaint is fading. Needs a good repaint, which I hope to do soon. It's pretty solid for what it is. The rockers have been replaced at some point with just a piece of angle iron. I have plans to cut that out, put it back to how it should be. But for now, it's kept the car solid. And it has an interesting tail light setup. I looked in the wiring diagram because I was pretty confused. The middle light is the stop light. And so anytime you press on the brakes, that middle light comes on. If you turn on the headlights, the two side tail lights come on. So there is no tail light in the middle. The only tail lights are on those side lights. And then if you turn on your indicator lights, your turning indicators, those come on the side. And so more than once people have said, oh, you've got a brake light out, or oh, you've got two brake lights out. But that's how they made it. And this lens is glass. Both the side lenses are glass. And then the middle one must be some form of plastic. Overall, I really like the styling of this car. I think they did it right from the factory. Of course, being a custom guy, there are improvements that I would make. Not sure if I will do that to this one or not. If I was going to make my own custom improvements, what I would do, I brought it into Photoshop once. I took some photos and had some different rows of tape so that I knew what my measurements would be as I started to play around with making it look different. And if I cut a foot out of the center of the car and shortened the whole chassis a foot, and if I chopped the top 3 inches and channeled the body over the frame 2 inches, I would bring this C pillar up and I would make that into the B pillar. So it would have a slanted B pillar. Then you would have one bad looking custom. And by bad, I mean good. Here's a quick screen capture of what I did when I brought it into Photoshop. And you can see I also gave it fender skirts. But if I was gonna give it the ultimate custom treatment, this is what I'd like to do. So maybe this one will get that treatment, I don't know. I'm also keeping my eyes open for another Chrysler Windsor in that same date range. And maybe I'd do that, give that second one that treatment. There you go. Now you know all about the couch. Hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe you'll see me on the road in it soon.